chapter, brethren and sisters. What a chapter that is. And we have been privileged to see so much of that already is in process of being fulfilled. But to what extent do we really understand the unfolding fulfillment of prophecy, brethren and sisters? Is there a danger that we have become so familiar with our traditional concept of Israel's return that we fail to see the further developments that have been taking place today and that have taken place in recent history? Could we have any blind spots? Because we don't want them, do we? We want a clear vision. Are we stuck in a 19th century mould and therefore cannot update our vision of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Well, I don't mean to suggest that our traditional understanding has been wrong. Not at all. But there has been over 150 years passed since Brother Thomas published his book, Elpis Israel. 150 years of history and development that has brought us that much closer to the coming of Christ and the establishment of the kingdom in Israel. We have witnessed the vindication of much of what Brother Thomas wrote, and we know his words very, very well. There is then, he wrote, a partial and primary restoration of the Jews before the manifestation, or before the advent of Christ, as he wrote in an earlier edition, which is to serve as the nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-adventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturists and traders. Elpis Israel, 1849. And today, we are privileged to see the pre-adventual restoration, brothers and sisters. It is now in front of our eyes, and we have got rather used to it. It doesn't seem to have the impact upon us as it did upon earlier brethren and sisters. You know, a little while ago, I discussed this passage in Elpis Israel with the well-known historian, Sir Martin Gilbert. It was just a short time before he died, a few months ago. I thought you would be interested in his comments when this passage from Elpis Israel was pointed out to him. And this is what he had to say. Sir Martin, Elpis Israel was written over 150 years ago, and the author, Dr. John Thomas, made some remarkable predictions of the Jewish return, basing his remarks on Bible prophecy. How do you view this, first as a historian, and then as a Jewish person?
As a historian, I find it very inspiring that someone from a religious perspective should really be so aware of the historical currents of that time. Not just aware of them, but foreseeing them very clearly. So that in 1849, he's talking about, first of all, events which began in 1882. That is, as he puts it so rightly, the political return of individual Jews to set up farming colonies. And then the prediction that there would have to be a power, what in those days was called the powers, a great power, which would essentially liberate the land so that the Jews could form their commonwealth. There he uses the phrase commonwealth. And it was to be some years before this happened. There was a precedent, Palmerston's giving us part of Britain's interest in the area. Palmerston's giving protection to the Jews of Jerusalem, British diplomatic protection. But what Dr. Thomas is proposing is something much more comprehensive than that, and in that sense foreshadows first of all, it foreshadows Herzl's political Zionism, First Basel Congress, 1897, and the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And he talks about British statesmen. He's fairly caustic about their abilities at the time that he's writing, but he again envisages a different calibre of statesmen, in which certainly Balfour and then Churchill, and he was in charge of the Palestine Mandate in 1921, fit the bill.
So here is a notable historian recognizing the accuracy of Brother Thomas's prediction back in 1849. He noted the political nature of the return, as well as the farmers and the traders working to establish a commonwealth. If you look up that word commonwealth in the Oxford Dictionary, it defines it as follows: an independent state or community. And that, brothers and sisters, is exactly what emerged on May the 14th, 1948. With that understanding, we can say that Brother Thomas, in a sense, foresaw the state of Israel. It's an incredible situation that has come about. The words again, where the pre-adventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles. And we mustn't feel embarrassed if sometimes we are accused of taking too much interest in politics, because it's on a political basis that this fulfillment of prophecy was worked out. And Brother Thomas foresaw that that's what would happen. The Jewish colonists would return in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus. And we've seen that. And of the truth as it is in him, and they still to this day don't understand the truth as it is in Jesus. They will emigrate thither, says Brother Thomas, as agriculturists and traders, and so they did, in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth. And so, brothers and sisters, when we look at the prophecies, and we look at the fulfillment of these prophecies, we see exactly these things coming to pass. For example, if we turn to Ezekiel chapter 34, we will see in Ezekiel 34, especially verse 13, 3 stages to the restoration of the Jews. Ezekiel 34:13 reads, I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries, and will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel by the rivers and in all the inhabitant places of the country. That's exactly what happened. I've put on the screen the 3 stages. First of all, I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries. That happened from the late 1800s through to 1917 and so on. Second stage, I will bring them to their own land. They didn't have their own land, brothers and sisters, until 1948, but now they do. And the third section, I will feed them upon the mountains of Israel. And there were no Jews on the mountains of Israel until 1967, after that well-known war that took place in 1967. So our own Christadelphian community has involved itself in this process of political restoration, though that's the way it has been. The sort of thing I mean is, for example, back in the 19th century, Brother Roberts channeled clothes and funds in order to assist the colonization of Palestine by Jews. Here's a page out of one of the Christadelphian magazines, where the heading is The Christadelphian Contribution to Palestine Colonization. So we took an active part in what was taking place. Our attachment to the hope of Israel had a practical outlet, brothers and sisters, and this led to the assistance of immigrants, establishing small communities, such as, for example, Rosh Pinah. This is the settlement as it is today. But it came into being with the help of brethren and sisters back in the 19th century. They, despite their poverty, despite their poor circumstances, many of them gave what they could in order to further the purpose of God as they understood it from prophecy and from the purpose of God to become a help to the restoration of the Jewish people. Another place in Palestine, as it was then, was Zichron Yaakov in 1910. It was another settlement which brethren and sisters helped to establish. It's a long time ago now. But that same place, brothers and sisters, is there today, and you can visit it. This is Zichron Yaakov today. It has come into being in fulfillment of prophecy, but also through the prayers and the contribution of our earlier brothers and sisters. It was an expression of their belief. It was an expression of their hope. And then came the political breakthrough. 1917, the Balfour Declaration. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, and the rest of it you know. We know the history, brothers and sisters. Most of us in this room will be very familiar with these things. But do we still appreciate the hand of God being involved in all of this? Do we see that? It's so important, brothers and sisters, that we do. Can we still pick up the feeling generated in our community by that event when it happened? It's described by Brother Ladson in the Christadelphian for 1917. And what he wrote there is, I'll put it on the screen, the declaration of the sympathy of the British government in the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jews has thrilled the hearts of the brethren and sisters, the brethren of Christ in the world over. There would be few ecclesias where on the Sunday morning following the declaration the theme would not be joyfully enlarged upon, and the whole service in prayers, hymns, and anthems be warmly touched with the emotion generated by such a vindication of our faith. Can we still feel that, brothers and sisters? Or have we got so used to it that the impact isn't there anymore? The thing was done suddenly, striking for the moment, dumb with silence. It was just a few years after this that the San Remo Conference came into being, and that brought into being the Balfour Declaration. The British mandate now took on a particular shape. And up to this point, brothers and sisters, our earlier brethren had got it exactly right. We can't overlook that. We need to understand that they had got it absolutely right. Their understanding of Scripture was right up to that point. But in July 1920, there was a failure. The Jews did not want the national home. They were too comfortable in the lands of their dispersion. They repeated their history once again. Psalm 106, just to remind ourselves of it. Yea, they despised the pleasant land. They believed not his word. And so in the 1920s, things changed. And so things didn't turn out quite as we had hoped, as we had expected. Nothing against what our earlier brethren had written, but who foresaw the Holocaust? Do not the words of Scripture fill in some of the blanks, brothers and sisters, have a look at Ezekiel chapter 20 with me for a moment. Ezekiel chapter 20. Verse 33. As I live, saith Yahweh, surely with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and with fury poured out will I rule over you. And I will bring you out from the people and will gather you out of the countries wherein you were scattered, with a strong hand and with a stretched out arm and with fury poured out. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face, like as I pleaded with your fathers in the wilderness, in the land of Egypt. So will I plead with you, saith the Lord God. And I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. That's where it's going. So, brothers and sisters, we see a fulfillment of that. Note the phrase there, with fury poured out. It's repeated. It's there twice. It's there again through to verse 27. Note the repeated phrase. Why is it there twice? Could it suggest more than one fulfillment? The Tanakh, that's the Jewish translation of the Old Testament, translates that as with outpoured wrath. And I'd like you to notice that it is the language of the vials, the vials of wrath being poured out. And it was the time of the vials when this took place. You know, brothers and sisters, some years ago, I went to Jerusalem and I had the opportunity to speak with the vice president of Yad Vashem. I'm sure you know Yad Vashem. And in the 1980s, he was emphasizing to me the impact of the Holocaust upon the Jewish people. He said, how can you fathom 6 million killed? It's still making an impact on the Jewish people today. When you go to Israel and you talk to people, it's not long before the subject of the Holocaust comes up. But he said to me, he says, how can you fathom 6 million being killed? If 5 people are killed in a car crash, you can understand that. A bus with 45 people on, you can understand that. A plane crash, much larger, but you can still visualize it. You can understand that, you know, the plane has completely disappeared over the Pacific or somewhere. But 6 million? We cannot fathom, we cannot visualize it. That's what Reuven Daphne told me. And he was a very interesting man, because he had been parachuted behind Nazi lines during the Second World War to rescue some of the Jewish people from there. So he was an interesting man. He'd got first-hand experience of these things. And so he pointed out the incredible impact that this had had. And then following that, there's the plight of the Jewish refugees after the war. You know, the war was over. Sorry, I should have put that on first. The war was over, but they had no place to go. The scriptures come to mind, don't they? Deuteronomy 28, verse 65. And among these nations thou shalt find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. How literally those words were fulfilled. And we know they were. But do we know that history, brothers and sisters? Do we have an understanding of it? In general terms, yes, we do. But what did it mean? What did it mean, brothers and sisters, when the British Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevin, who precipitated what Churchill called a squalid war against the Jews, what brought this about? How did it end up? Well, Bevin died suddenly in 1951, but he had been responsible for immense Jewish suffering among Holocaust survivors. I'm going to read you just one account. This was a member of a committee called the Joint, which was American Jews who went to Europe after the war and saw what was happening there. He wrote that 7.5 million Jews were inhabiting Europe before the war. 6.25 million had been killed or had died. In a confidential report since published, this writer says, "We have a situation in Europe today which gives us very little reason for optimism. We have a continent on which 5/6 of the Jewish population has been exterminated. We have a continent on which there are some 1,250,000 Jews left, Jews who are living under the most distressing conditions. It may be said, using a biblical phrase, that there is not a Jewish home in Europe today in which there is not one dead. And there are many Jewish homes in which there is not one living. Everybody is mourning for a father or a mother who has been deported and of whom no news has been heard, in mourning for children who have vanished, in mourning for some dear one and near one who will never be heard from again. There are children, thousands of them, who are without father and mother and without anybody to look after them." And then, describing the arrival of these survivors at the camps, he says, "They are literally without anything. They are without clothing. They are without shoes. They have no place to spend the night. They haven't a sou in their pockets. They have nothing to look forward to. I must tell you that many of them are swollen with hunger. Many of them cannot walk a step. Many of them need immediate medical attention and medical care. They cannot be put on their own. They cannot be told to shift for themselves. People are coming back who had been given up for the dead. They come in walking like ghosts, like shadows." These are people. They are real people. Brothers and sisters, surely we are touched with some feeling. And we put these things against the Scriptures. And we see in the Scriptures, brothers and sisters, the description which is so dramatically fulfilled in these things. Jeremiah 31, we read it by way of an opening reading. I'm just going to go over a section from verses 8 to 10. "Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the coasts of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child and her that travaileth with child together. A great company shall return thither. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications will I lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock." And so we see the hand of God at work in these things that took place after the Second World War. This may refer to a yet future regathering, as some would see it, but don't let's overlook what has already happened, brothers and sisters. Don't let's overlook the plight of these Jewish people. Excuse me, but I just have to shed a skin. From Eastern Europe they came, by train, by ship, by foot, by any means possible. And they came down from the north parts, exactly fulfilling what the prophecy had said. It was an incredible phase of history. And the photographs and the films are there for us to see today. Behold, I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the coasts of the earth, and with them the blind and the lame and the woman with child, and her that travaileth with child together. You can see all that happening on film that's available today. Yes, there were lame people there. There were women with child. There were those who were actually in the process of giving birth as they made their way on these ships to the promised land. A great company shall return thither. And here on this photograph you see a few of them. One film that you can see is called The Long Way Home. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it to you. The Long Way Home, and it shows how that these Jewish people came over the Alps, all over through the part that was there. They were hard and harsh experiences. Many different books have been written to record the events that you can also see on film. And it's there that we see it happening. And all this for what? To form a nucleus of the kingdom. Incredible, brothers and sisters. All these things happening to form a nucleus of the kingdom. Until
Afghanistan, no. Argentina, abstention. Australia, yes. France, yes. Good.
By virtue of the natural and historic right of the Jewish people and of the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, we hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called Israel.
that thrilled our brethren and sisters when they saw that. My parents, my grandparents witnessed it. I was alive, but too young to appreciate what was happening. And one of the most famous parts of all this, of course, which turned the whole thing round, was the well-known ship, the Exodus. And some while ago, I was able to obtain a movie clip made by the captain of the ship, the Exodus.
I realize what I'm carrying. I'm carrying the last children of Israel who were alive in Europe. Whatever was left of my nation after 6 million were killed. And the responsibility was enormous. I realized what I'm carrying. And on the Exodus were like a small town, 4,500 people with all the things. We have elderly, children, sick, everything you wanted. And this was to me the lighthouse of my work.
In an attempt to gain control of the ship, Royal Marine commandos from the two destroyers on either side jumped aboard the Exodus.
Some of them we took back to the sea, some we took prisoner. They opened fire, they killed 3 people and we had over 100 wounded. We didn't have any arms. Our arms was the children and women. The cruelty and of warship attacking a very old ship, which carried 4,500 people, was beyond my understanding, because the tragedy could have happened. They could have sunk the Exodus. Then will be a catastrophe.
On the 18th of July 1947, the battle-scarred Exodus with its weary cargo of Holocaust survivors docked in Haifa harbor.
Out of Palestine comes the camera story of the Exodus, the Jewish immigrant ship that highlights new violence in the Holy Land.
The refugees were taken off the Exodus and transferred to 3 prison ships, 1,500 people on each ship. Even the wounded were transferred, all except those who were critically injured and the dead. Crew members of the Exodus were deported with them.
When they came and then were beaten by British soldiers, they start crying. It was unbelievable. 1,500 people crying. It was so devastating to them to see they are being expelled from Haifa, from Israel, and they just sat down, they cried. They cried. It was something which we will carry all our life.
They cried. And brothers and sisters, we can cry with them. We can feel it. The incredible lengths that human governments would go to try to prevent the restoration of Israel. And you know what, brothers and sisters? It's still happening today. Despite democracy and the election that's recently taken place in Israel, we see the same thing, anything to stop the restoration of the Jews. And we can't be surprised if some of them fought back, and they certainly did. Not a very pretty sight, some of it, but that is what happened. And so it was that the dramatic return to Zion was seen to fulfill prophecy, at least in part. We may ask why. Why has the emergence of Israel been so traumatic? The answer to this is that the nation has been brought under the rod of discipline, just like the prophecy says, in order to prepare it for the coming kingdom. I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant, we read in Ezekiel 20. And so the dramatic return to Zion was seen to fulfill prophecy. There was the War of Independence in 1948. And then in 1967, some years later, another phase was seen. A time of difficult trial. So that's brought us then to 1967, when another phase in the restoration took place. And
this is Kol Yisrael, the Voice of Israel, broadcasting from Jerusalem. Wednesday, June the 7th, 1967, 4:30 p.m. The military spokesman announces, this morning the Israel Defense Forces penetrated the old city of Jerusalem. Sharm el-Sheikh has been captured, the straits are open. The Chief of Staff announces that the entire Sinai Peninsula is in Israeli hands, as is the greater part of the west bank of the Jordan, the old city of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, and the Etzion bloc. The Air Force commander announces the destruction of 441 planes belonging to Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq.
all ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth the trumpet, hear ye. And brethren and sisters, in 1967, the shofar trumpet sounded within the walls of Jerusalem, and it's still echoing down the years to our own time now. And we can hear the echoes of it, brothers and sisters. We're seeing it in events. And so what we see is prophecy being fulfilled in our time. As God says through the prophet Joel, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. And that is what happened in 1967. It was a victory, an amazing victory for the Jewish people. But it also cost many Israeli lives. We can talk sometimes a little too glibly about Israel's miraculous wars without remembering the boys, the fathers, the sons who were lost in those battles, loved ones who were killed and wounded. We're talking, brothers and sisters, not just about Jews, we're talking about people. People with feelings, with relatives, with all these things. Well, it was all foreseen. And it was all foreseen by our brother Thomas. Judah, Jerusalem, and the mountains of Israel. It was in Eureka, volume 3, that John Thomas wrote in 1868, and so that's 100 years before 1967, he wrote, "There will have been a considerable gathering of Israelites upon the mountains of Israel before the invasion of the country by Gog and his capture of Jerusalem." Incredible foresight, brothers and sisters. Incredible foresight. 100 years before. And Brother Thomas is seeing that that was going to happen. And so we read the scriptures again. "I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries and will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel, by the rivers and in all the inhabitant places of the country. I will feed them in a good pasture, and upon the high mountains of Israel shall their fold be." And you can go to the high mountains of Israel today, brothers and sisters, and you can see them. And in our second half, I'm going to take you with me to meet some of those people that are on the mountains of Israel. And there they are to be fed. There they will lie down in a good fold, and in a fat pasture shall they feed, upon the mountains of Israel. And so, brothers and sisters, we are thankful for the work of our earlier brethren that have brought these things to our attention. Let us not forget what they said. The truth is there are two stages in the restoration of the Jews. The first is before the Battle of Armageddon, and the second after it. There is then a partial and primary restoration of the Jews before the manifestation, which is to serve as the nucleus. We all know what a nucleus is, or a basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-adventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles. And if we get a little bit excited sometimes about the political basis of Israel today, brothers and sisters, it's understandable. Because here we have it in our own writings. And so I asked Martin Gilbert, the historian, I thought, what do you think about it? So in your Jewish History Atlas, which Christadelphians have made a lot of use of, by the way, over the years, You have a dramatic map there, and I'm sure you'll remember it. It's of the return, 1948-64. And you quote there Ezekiel chapter 11 and verse 17 on your map. And on another page you quote Isaiah chapter 10 verse 22, a remnant of them shall return. So that raises the question for us, Sir Martin, do you believe the prophets?
I think that a Jewish person, unless they've completely drifted away from the faith, has to put the prophets at the very centre of their understanding of the faith. Without the prophets, in a sense, there's no evolving Judaism. And most of them are prophesying at a time when clearly the Jews had fallen on hard times, to a large extent because of their own failings and their own weaknesses. And I think without the prophets, Judaism becomes essentially a historic curiosity. Obviously the faith, the ethics, the Ten Commandments, the 613 mitzvot, they all would have a relevance today. But in terms of how the Jewish people are going to evolve, I think the prophecies are tremendously important. Partly because they do prophesy a different state of being for the Jews, and partly because they enshrine in the strongest form the ethical precepts without which the Jews are essentially told they will not achieve this position of greater grace.
Mm-hmm. Well, in as far as he understands them, he does, but more about that later. So we ask the question then, what is the purpose of this political restoration that we see today, brothers and sisters? It is, without doubt, the first step in the restoration of the kingdom. It is, as Brother Thomas described it, a nucleus, and a nucleus has been formed. But that is only the first step, albeit a major one. They have returned in unbelief, and that return in unbelief is to serve as the nucleus or basis for future operations. So there's more still to happen. Changes must come. I won't stop to go through the passages there, but you can take a note of them if you wish. It's Hosea 3, verses 4 and 5, Ezekiel 34, verses 13 and 14, Jeremiah 3, verses 14 and 16, and Jeremiah 23, 3 and 4, and there are others. Hard things must yet be faced, brothers and sisters. Hard things have already been faced and must yet be faced again. But we remember what the scripture says as we come to the close of this first part. Turn to the Psalms, Psalm 121. You'll know the words. They're well known amongst us. Psalm 121. And these words are as true today as they have ever been. Psalm 121, and I'm reading verses 4 and 5. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. Yahweh is thy shade upon thy right hand. And so it is, brothers and sisters, we know. Whatever may happen in the near future, and however difficult times may be, Israel has one who watches over them. And at last, through the work of his Son particularly, he will bring into being that kingdom on earth upon which the throne of David, upon which the Lord Jesus Christ will sit. Thank you.